My name is Brenda McClellan, and I just had a quick question about what I think was a minor point that you raised. Under what was cut from the base, you mentioned environmentally sensitive DP area, and I just wondered if you could explain a little bit just what that is, because I don't know.
Okay, it is a project that our planning department is working on, and it is going to continue. I'll let Jason explain what the project is. It was not meant to imply that the project is not going forward. Right. It's just the extra budget now, because some of the work is being contracted out, is going to be done, or planned to be done in-house.
Yeah, it wasn't a huge amount. I think it was about $5,000, and I think it anticipated to hire someone to help do some scientific background, to provide extra justification on what was going to be included in the development from the area and what wasn't. So, we were casting.
Just a second, Jason. Can everybody hear Jason? Good. Okay. Thanks.
So that was what was removed from the budget in an effort to meet that council's request that we take it to a 4.5% increase. So that was basically one of the few slack projects that I had in terms of extra special projects that were funded in the planning department. So that was what I offered as the planning department's contribution to help meet our goal. Does that answer your question?
I think so. So if I understand correctly then, it's basically trying to identify, is it a criteria or something for identifying particular environmental concerns that come in with respect to the development permits that are applied for?
Yeah, I think it's an issue we ran into. I'll use the example of steep slopes. We came forward to a public hearing with a map that just wasn't adequate, and it just didn't stand the test of public scrutiny. And so some of the learning we did from that is that before we come out with the new development permit area, which does put restrictions on what people can and can't do with their property or how they do things, we need to make sure that there's kind of a sound rationale and actual kind of science and strong data that underlies that. So that was the intent of using that money, was just to kind of build the strength of that development permit area, so that when we stood up in public and we had a map showing where these new areas were going to be, we could provide a sound rationale on why that was in.
Other questions? Paul?
Paul Wilson. I just noticed that you have youth camp space improvements. I'm assuming that's to rental spaces?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So you talk about contributions to reserves, and you don't mention the facility reserve fund, which there is, I think. And I'm wondering where that sits in terms of that particular slide, and also the one where restricted reserve fund, where does it sit in terms of what you just showed us?
The contribution to civic facilities was established a couple of years ago at $30,000, and it's been maintained. That's why it wasn't mentioned as an incremental. It didn't have an incremental effect on its budget, so we spent, or budgeted $30,000 last year, we budgeted $30,000 this year for it. So we only highlighted the changes. So it's there. It is not, has not been designated as a restricted reserve. We haven't set it up as a statutory reserve yet.
Other questions? Sally?
Sally Freeman. Joanne, could you go back to the last slide?
Maybe.
Okay, the spike.
The spike.
The spike. If you took the spike out, what would happen to that graph?
Nothing. That is the new reserve, brand new.
Okay.
Because when we sell the surplus land, any monies that are coming from the sale of municipal land must go into a special reserve or pay off debt. So we have to create a special reserve for the proceeds from that sale, and then that reserve, those monies can only be used for whatever we set that reserve for, whatever we establish that reserve for. So it's contemplated that, or in my mind at least, that reserve would be established for capital, well, obviously capital purposes, but it might even be more specific to that based on what council's decision is. They may decide that it is specifically for the development of a municipal hall, say, as opposed to development of the larger context of community center or otherwise. They might go different.
I thought it was supposed to pay off our debt.
That is, and that's also assumed in the budget, is that there will be sufficient proceeds from the sale of the lands to pay off the debt. And create that reserve and push that money right back out into capital projects.
Okay, this is just a comment, but this is not my strong suit, budgets, but really this doesn't make any sense to me. There's one thing that makes sense, and that is 6%. The rest of it doesn't really mean anything. So I appreciate the work that you put into it, and maybe it's just me because I don't understand budgets very well, but I'm not stupid. And it really, and I have looked at this stuff a bit, but it really doesn't mean anything to me. So maybe that's just something you have to work on. I'm sure it means something to you, but I'd like you to fix it so that it meant something to me.
Well, any questions you have, welcome to, and I'll help you work through it. The only purpose of this was to demonstrate that we do have some plans in place to continue saving. Because one of the big observations of this budget is that we're using up a lot of the savings that we've put away since incorporation.
Okay,
Okay,
that means
so,
something.
yeah, so this is what I was trying to demonstrate,
Yeah.
was in spite of the fact that we already, it's only very draft form right now.
Yeah.
Within that draft, it looks like we're using up a lot of savings, we are,
Yeah.
but there's also plans in place to continue those good works. You know, so it's not like we're then, okay, we'll spend all our money and forget everything else.
Okay.
Okay? That was the point.
Thank you.
I just sort of speak to Sal's point too. I understand the concern there that is also a concern of staff and councils, and that's the question of what if we cannot sell those lands, or what if we, more appropriately, what if we don't sell those lands? A lot has changed since we considered this at the last council. We were in a very strong market. We assumed we would be able to sell them for a certain price. The market has completely changed. Our capacity to sell them has changed. I think it's widely understood that that's a concern on council, and that's a concern expressed by Joanne in terms of sort of forecasting our capacity to deal with any other capital improvements with that outstanding debt. Do you want to speak to sort of the impact on basically the cost? We are financing that debt in a certain way. There are deadlines coming, and when we hit those deadlines, we cross a threshold to a more expensive way of servicing that debt. Can you speak to that, Joanne?
Okay. We have up until, practically speaking, we have about a year, up until about April 2010, have the money in hand to pay off the $2 million loan. Otherwise, we won't meet the fall debt issue from MFA. We're obligated to borrow from MFA. We won't have a choice there. That gives you the time frame that we're confronted with now. And if we do lock that money in, we will have some choices, 10 years, 15 years, 20, 30 years. And some of those choices come at a premium. If we want to have the opportunity to pay it off at the 10-year mark, we'll pay a little bit of a higher premium for it. All decisions to be made later if we cannot accomplish paying off that debt. So when we do lock it in, then we will be paying principal and interest as a debenture debt, and it can't have time to go into explaining that right now, but it is a form of financing that appears to have a higher interest rate than you would normally see in say in a banking situation.
Well, it does have
Pardon?
It does have
It does, but there's mitigating factors, and the real interest rate ends up being quite a bit less than it looks like. It's a hard thing to explain. I can't explain it here. Because there's sinking funds. It's a bond issue is what it is. And if you know anything about bonds, you don't get paid until the end of the term.
Okay.
Question to you?
My name is Hugh Freeman. Go back to the slide that you were on, the next slide.
The next slide.
I don't want to fight. Could you give me some idea? I mean, this is all very useful information, but could you give us some idea of how this compares to other communities of similar size? I know that, for example, I've heard via the undercurrent that the Armstrong, Ontario, or Armstrong, BC has